Today on Voice the Valleys, the first Black Briton has been revealed to be absolutely nothing of the sort, with recent DNA analysis revealing that the first quote-unquote Black Briton was in fact a white Roman lady, blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, the response to the Bondi shooting gets even worse, and there's so much more for us to discuss around it, particularly with regards to the government saying that they're going to, you guessed it, crack down on more guns and crack down on more speech. A Greens councillor has given up the whip over concerns into a slavery probe, and the government is now pushing boys in particular through anti-misogyny training in schools because of Andrew Tate. All that and more today on Voice of the Valleys. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys yet again with your host, friendly neighbourhood far-right thug, historical, unless he's not Mr. George Cresswell. Hope we're having a fantastic, take a breath, morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. Now, strap in, ladies and gentlemen. Probably going to be a long episode today. A lot of things to go through, a lot of things that I want to go through, a lot of things that I've missed out on, because I know I've been a little bit AWOL recently, had a couple of things going on, and also potentially coming in with a little bit of the seasonal sniffles, should we say. So I'm going to try and keep on top of it as much as I can. We've got a stream coming tomorrow night, and a very, very important one. Hopefully put out some more details on it later on today. It's Friday the 19th of December, time of recording. Currently 1:45 in the afternoon, and probably going to be sometime in the early to late evening tomorrow. Now we'll try and keep it on the shorter side. It's going to be the Windrush myth with David Starkey. It's going to be very, very important and useful conversation to understanding a lot of the history and the myths that have been spun within Britain with regards to immigration, who actually built Britain, all of these things, right? Getting straight into today. First things first, make sure you go and like and follow on all the other platforms as well, Rumble in particular. Oftentimes, a lot of things we're going to be talking about today might get cut, might have to get, censored and taken out and all of those things for YouTube. So make sure you go and check out some of those other platforms as well, where they're going to be uncut and uncensored. Something's going really weird with Spotify at the moment. Audio, not audio. Uploading doesn't seem to be working, so I will hopefully get that rectified as soon as possible. But Rumble, still go over there. Make sure you're following on Rumble in case the sword of Damocles falls on my head. Now, first things first, again today, the lineup of things that we got to go through today. You would have heard a little bit about, certain stories we're going through in the intro. There's been a tremendous Christmas gift that have been given to the British people in terms of collapsing the false narratives around diversity-built Britain and all of these things. Now, the woman, turns out, who was first recognised as the first Black Briton, as a woman of sub-Saharan descent, who would have been here from the timeline that we now have, about 1700 to 1900 years, right, from the radiocarbon dating that's now been done, turns out was nothing of the sort. So the whole thing's, when you see like the Black Anglo-Saxon at the Battle of Hastings and Earl Morcar represented as what appears to be some other kind of ethnic descent, right, that distinctly isn't Anglo-Saxon. Turns out that when the Romans were here, the Romans didn't look African, or a typical person who existed here around the time of the Roman occupation, did not look African. Right? Despite the lies that you've been told. They looked, as I'll bring it up on screen for you just in a moment, they looked a little bit more like this. So this is our first Black Briton, ladies and gentlemen, which you would have seen. The story's been breaking the last couple of days. And it's another brick falling out of the wall of this diversity-built Britain, diversity-built the Western narrative. Everybody built the West, aside from Westerners themselves, right? And it's good that this narrative is crumbling, because it's been one that's been used to wage a, silent extinction campaign against the British people in Britain in particular. So who is this lady? She's known as the Beachy Head Woman, right? And initial testing seemed to indicate, at least in terms of if the science we're going to believe in this instance was actually done properly, right? Now, this is the thing with science, having been through parts of university myself, right? Having conducted experiments, studies myself, my sports and exercise science background. Now, there can be conflicting results. It can lead you one way, but then you refine your approach and it can lead you back another way, right? Science, it doesn't just proceed in a straight line, right? And then you find out things that you don't expect to find out, and then that proceeds more routes of investigation, right? You don't know where the paths are. The paths are all out there, right? The paths are all out there, but every time you discover something, it's like having this light in a forest, right? And you're lighting as you go along. Each study represents a little like lamp which you put on this tree, but then you have no idea where all these different paths go, and it takes time to investigate these things, right? Now, when this body was first found, there's no official date of excavation, right? So we don't actually know when it was found. It's thought to be around the 1950s. Obviously, techniques have developed a lot since then, which allowed us to eventually come to the truth. Now, a basic string of logic would indicate that, majority of people in Britain, even just going back as far as the time when this body would have been discovered, about 1950s, nearly 100% were white. And that meant that, if you're white, for example, descending from white people, that odds are your parents were white, right? That would mean then that odds are their parents were white. And then their parents would be white, and their parents would be white, and so on and so on and so on. It doesn't matter, they can come from like slightly different tribes and clans and very ever so slightly different ethnic groups that make up all these different Northwestern European clans and tribes, right? The Celts, Saxons, Anglos, Jutes, right? All of these different things, but very, very closely related. They wouldn't have been the kind of propaganda that you see, like black Africans at the Battle of Hastings and Africans with the pagan, Celtic blue paint on them, as you've seen in the propaganda nowadays, right? But that's the narrative that's been spun, and people have been more than happy to do it, to the detriment of the British people and to further their own interests so they can benefit from it. And we've got some clips to go over with regards to that as well. So where did this get its start? In 2016, a series known as Black and British, A Forgotten History, really a history that didn't exist until about, again, 70 to 100 years ago, suggested that Roman skeleton of a woman found at Beachy Head was from sub-Saharan Africa. And as you can imagine, professors, academics, and experts, remember the trust the science, wear a mask, 6 feet social distancing, safe and effective, those experts, right? Ran with it. David Olusoga, for example, said that his documentary series told the story of, quote, the enduring relationship between Britain and people whose origins lies in Africa. It's kind of narrative that it's been able to spin, right? And then diversity built Britain is the logical consequence of that. Diversity is our strength. Rishi Sunak and, a Hindi holding that 50 pence coin with diversity is our strength or diversity built Britain on it. Complete lie. That is like the most, like the epitome of colonization. That is on top of, foreigners flying their flags above your buildings and so on. In episode 1 of this documentary, it was presented as sub-Saharan African in origin, the woman from Beachy Head was, and the program featured a reconstruction of her features with dark skin, hair, and eyes. The woman in that instance would have looked like this. So this is the image that the original Beachy Head woman was being circulated at the time to fuel this narrative, again, of Black Britons, which, like married bachelors, don't exist, can't exist, right? So this is the image that was run with. And also you had, like I said, the quote-unquote experts, expert archaeologist Joe Seaman, right, unfortunate surname, explained that her African origins, as a statement of fact, and the age of her remains were likely to have made her the earliest Black Briton. Well, now all of that has fallen apart because Dr. William Marsh has carried out this genetic study, has shown that her genetic ancestry is most similar to other individuals of the local population of Roman-era Britain, i.e. white people. And that's where you get this from. Blonde-haired and blue-eyed, in fact, right? This did not come, this narrative, however, if you were paying attention, which I didn't even know to pay attention at this time, I would have been in college at this time, not having a slightest clue of understanding what was going on, having just spent, and still going through more state-funded education, which is completely red-washed in this multiculturalism and diversity narrative. It's a propaganda factory. In 2017, an initial genetic study suggested that, in fact, she came from the Mediterranean, possibly Cyprus rather than Africa. So that plaque then, the plaque that said, I'll bring it up for you now. This is the plaque that was put up when the rumours or when the assertions were going around that the woman from Beachy Head was a African. So it says here, the remains of the Beachy Head woman were found near this site. Of African origin, she lived in East Sussex, 2nd to 3rd century AD. So either a complete lie or complete misinformation that people ran with, especially in David Olusoga's case, coming from Nigerian descent, would have good reason to run with it because he would have reason to benefit from it. And you see that with some of the other people that are heading up certain charities and organisations within Wales as well, like the Welsh Race Council, which we'll come to in a moment. So it turns out this woman likely lived around 129 to 311 AD, corresponding to the Roman occupation of Britain. Again, not sure when the body was actually discovered, so not sure if this was just a propagandized effort to try and twist and erase the British people's history, or if it was a case of scientific methods evolving and allowing us to get to the truth, which really the basic most string of knowledge of who your ancestry is would tell you that there was something wrong with this narrative. There's been, again, other little things like there's been no greater time in history where humans have been able to travel across the globe. You go back to the time when this woman would have been alive, there's much less in terms of the ability for people to massively emigrate all across the world. So again, massively clouds this narrative and just like, oh, I guess you should ask questions, but asking questions is racist, but silence is violence, and that's also racist. So there you go. You see, the whole thing with these leftists, the only way to quote unquote win is not to play, but then that leads to your ultimate loss. So you have to play regardless of whether you want to or not. Analysis of her remains suggested that she was actually 80 to 25 years old when she died. She stood just over 4'9", and a healed wound on her leg suggested a serious but non-fatal injury at some point in life. And then this is some of the additional images which the Telegraph shared, basically them doing some sort of facial mapping, it seems, to try and reconstruct some of her facial features. I'll just bring this up on this one for you. So you can see here where the similarities and stuff would come in. So this is very much more so what she looked like, far much more in line with what the traditional understanding of British history would be in terms of who the native Britons are. So this is a exciting new development, and we're going to look at some of the ways that the false narratives have been peddled to push and make these things seem more normal than they actually are, and why you should be caring about these things. When you've seen that it's been used to denigrate, rewrite, and erase your history in pursuit of replacing the people and instituting a system of totalitarianism, right, by simply bringing in enough people so that the native people are outvoted in their own communities, things like this then, to make it seem more normal, and the complicity of the mainstream media should be getting a lot more attention, scrutiny, and scorn than they actually are. This is one example. This is what the BBC think an Anglo-Saxon soldier looked like at the Battle of Hastings. So what you're going to see now, ladies and gentlemen, is an African in what we would think to be traditional armour and helmet at the time, in a platoon or in some kind of battle formation at the Battle of Hastings. I'm not sure whether this is on the Norman side or whether this is on the Roman, whether this is on the Saxon side, the Anglo-Saxon side. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. The BBC have been prolific in this, however, prolific in distorting the history of the British people, which they did with Earl Morcar. I said, for example, Earl Morcar, an Anglo-Saxon warrior around the time, again, of the Battle of Hastings, the 11th century. This is how the BBC depicted him. This is how the BBC chose to depict him. Anglo-Saxon, eh? Now you might think, oh, this is, not big issue. This is, very, very small. It's like, oh, it's just for token diversity. Well, not only that is very insulting to people themselves, and many people of this descent openly say, that it's actually quite insulting, this token diversity and all of these things, right? But no, you can see the wider campaign that it's been used, right, to supplant the British people's history, to make it seem that these people were always here, right? And that makes them able to profit off it in the modern day, profit off now allegations of institutional racism, for example, institutionalized racism, systemic racism, and all of these things. That black history is British history, and it's nothing of the sort. It's nothing of the sort. For example, ladies and gentlemen, on why we need to start scrutinizing people, particularly when they're in positions like Uzo Iwobi here of the Welsh Race Council, where they want Welsh people, in this instance, to provide more taxpayer money, or British people in this instance, to provide more taxpayer money to actively supplanting their own institutions and their own abilities to make money, feed their families, or all of this stuff, right? Their own ability to survive and prosper in their own home, for the sake of foreigners. right? So Uzo Iwobi of the Welsh Race Council, the Race Council Cymru, have received plenty of taxpayers' cash over the years going to Doge Wales, but this ungrateful lot aren't satisfied. Appearing before a Senate committee, Chief Executive Uzo Iwobi, again, great Welsh name there, demanded more. So they're demanding more cash for Black and Asian organisations. The Welsh, right, the Welsh and who they are and in their own home, be absolutely damned. But here's that video coming on screen for you now.
Black, Asian and minority ethnic community groups who are the front facing and the recipients of a lot of the concerns raised by the communities around race issues are not core funded. Race Council Cymru is not core funded. We're only project funded. The UK government needs to deploy further funding to Welsh government to distribute in this sphere. If it is going to be successful, it needs to really be able to core fund Black-led organizations, Asian-led organizations that are on the ground doing the grassroots work.
Notice not Welsh-led organizations. I don't care about what happens to your kids and your people in your communities, right? In many instances, to advocate for your own people is simply seen as, you know, Nazism and racism. And that's what these people are doing all the time. It's fine when they do it. It's fine when they advocate DEI and preferential treatment for their lot, because again, within this Marxist framework, they're the ones that are always underprivileged and they're the always the oppressed. And that the natives in this instance, or anybody with a lighter skin complexion, right? Even those who have darker skin complexion but actually adopt the customs, right, and the attitudes. You see this a lot of time when in America, if Black people, right, instead of being in the hood, they operate more like what they view as white people operate. They get called Uncle Toms and all of this stuff, right? But at the same time, then they're pushing for people who adopt those good behaviors and actually contribute and build stuff in society and all of these things to fund more of this stuff to their own detriment. So, oh, hang on, more taxes going to come, so more can be sent to these people to do what? Do what with? Many statistics actually coming from these anti-British and anti-Welsh, anti-native organizations, right, that are heavily focused on the destruction of these nations, right? Whether they consciously perceive it or not, they obviously perceive as they're doing a good thing. But that's literally taking money from people through their taxes and all of these things and pushing it towards these causes which they may not support. And many people are rapidly turning in their support for because they're realizing the scam that's being pulled. But again, that's money that could have gone on their kids, the kids of those families and stuff like that. It's always take. And these organizations really don't give anything back in terms of making Wales a better place, in terms of making Britain a better place. Britain has never been more less great than it is now. We were a laughingstock on the world stage. And how much the British people are being dictated to by foreigners and foreign interests, how under the thumb they are of their own government who are beholden to these foreigners and foreign interests, how much the government hates them, how much our government hates us, right? Says us I'm talking about. That even if you so much as speak about it, you get thrown in prison, and more often than not, people are more than happy to rat on their own people, more than happy to rat on their own family members. Right? People are looking at us the same way that people looked in horror at East Germany, East Berlin, and these kinds of places where you had like Stasi and all things like that. They're looking on in horror. But at the same time, you know, laughing in freedom, because we are the ones that in many ways gave these things to the world. Concepts that America, freedom of speech, gun ownership, these things, right? The common law, Bill of Rights, they were adapted from what Britain had. And seeing Britain self-flagellate in this way for really no good reason whatsoever, if you're living elsewhere in the world where, you know, very basic freedoms are not under attack the same way that they are in Britain, right? And people are cheering it on. The British people in many instances are cheering it on, cheering on their own destruction. You can't help but laugh at some of these things. You know, when we go on about Donald Trump and have these big mass protests about Donald Trump, And America's just over there laughing, like, who the hell do you even think you are? You guys are nothing. You guys are under the thumb of your own government. You are an enslaved people. Who the hell do you think you are to even say anything and think that it's going to have any impact whatsoever? Why do we care if Donald Trump isn't welcome there? Not only is your protest not going to make any difference because everybody is going to go meet at the negotiation table with Donald Trump because leader of the most powerful country in the world at the moment. So everybody, right, is going to go. America, with how much it contributes to all of these other things, NATO spending and these things, everyone is going to listen. Everyone is going to listen. The only reason Zelensky wasn't listening for as long as he was, right, and seemingly being as disrespectful as he was deliberately, is because then he could play the victim of Donald Trump giving him a little bit of a spanking, and then he could go back to Britain and go back to Europe and cry and to get more taxpayer money out of them, who our government was obviously so happy to give to them. Despite the fact that their own citizens, many instances, are literally dying on the streets homeless with staph infections right now. And the NHS is on its arse. And yeah, this kind of socialism is great, guys. But yeah, it's Donald Trump that's the problem. I'd be laughing as well. I'd be laughing as well. Where does it start? Where do we start then? Well, the reason why this is so important, the reason why things like the myth around this first Black Briton being dispelled is so important, because the first thing we have to recapture is an understanding of the history, of people, of these isles, of the empire, and understanding what it really was, not what the left-wing ideologues want you to believe. Left-wingers, for example, or left-wing radicals don't want you to understand that it was the British Empire that was the premier force, if anything, at least one of the premier forces in the single biggest worldwide abolition of slavery effort that still goes on today in many areas of the world. That by force of purchase to then release, by force of pure military might, across the empire, they forced other countries to abolish the race-based slave trade. America then obviously followed suit after the Civil War started. One of the biggest things that then the Civil War did become about a little bit later on with the Emancipation Proclamation was the emancipation of slavery, the emancipation of the black slaves. No other civilization has done more to end race-based slavery than white Europeans. In many instances, we have more slaves in the world today than at any other point in history. Many other areas like the world, like the UAE, Dubai, right? One of the biggest places that entice people from like India, Pakistan, these other areas to come here and work, thinking you're going to get this big, like, you know, career and this lavish lifestyle working in Dubai, right? As soon as you get there, they take your passport and they ship you off to a friggin' labor camp. And they literally keep you in modern slavery. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard, a Greens councillor has resigned the whip over a slavery probe in the UK. As you probably guess, he's a British national, as we'll get on to a little bit later. It's the biggest distortion of our time, the narratives that have been spun about slavery, about colonialism, about how evil the white man is, all of these things, right? Even more so, like we saw with the Black Briton, erasing British history and pulling all of these different narratives out of their arse for political gain in the modern day. Going so far as to completely distort the facts, misuse the facts, because they're quote-unquote scared of how they would be used otherwise. They're scared that they might support, you know, narratives that they deem as white supremacy and the biggest evil of our time, Brexit, for example, which is actually exactly what Cheddar Man was used to support. Now, I accidentally just closed the tab that was open with that, so I need to quickly just reload it. Tom Rousel done a great video on this, where he talked about Cheddar Man. The whole video is titled, Was Stone Age Europe Black? Now, Tom Rousel is a historian. He's a heathen pagan, if I'm not mistaken. But he done this video, which we'll play a couple of clips from now. It's 5.5 minutes long in all. We'll probably watch sort of the first half or so, because it really dials down into how these things have been used for political narratives in the modern day and how much they've been distorted. But Cheddar Man was, again, one of these Stone Age Britons that was thought, or people were saying, was black, right? Of African, sub-Saharan African descent. But was he actually? No. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but obviously this is not my field of expertise. But here's a little extract from Tom to give you an insight into the myths behind Cheddar Man, which have been another vector used to push these false narratives.
I'll start with Cheddar Man, 10,000-year-old skeleton from Britain, which belongs to a race of people that geneticists refer to as Western hunter-gatherers. And these skeletons have been found all over Europe, Western Europe, from Spain up into Britain and Sweden, and they are generally a sort of a genetic group that formed somewhere around the Mesolithic, and then were replaced with the incoming of farming in the Neolithic. Basically, modern Europeans have inherited a lot of their blood, and they're a lot like modern Europeans, except one specific aspect. They didn't have brown eyes. All of them have blue eyes. The brown eyes were brought in later by the Neolithic farmers. And another thing brought in by the Neolithic farmers were genes associated with the complexions we now associate with Europeans. These are absent in Western hunter-gatherers, which has led some scientists to assume that perhaps these people had darker complexions. The media reported him as a sub-Saharan African, which is absolutely not true. But he was not a black man. I thought this media campaign had been engineered and scientists had encouraged it, knowing that it was a false narrative, because they wanted to encourage the disassociation of modern British people with the prehistoric inhabitants of the island.
So there you go. Listen to that a moment. They wanted to dissociate modern Britons with the historic inhabitants of these islands. Now, to give you a little bit of info, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sure the ages that he's talking to, so just from a basic Google search, the Mesolithic age, according to Google, you're looking sort of around about 10,000 to 4,000 BCE. Oh, well, I think BCE, but BC, whatever. Right? So you're looking at around a good while ago. Say if it cuts off around 4,000. Did I say if it cuts off around 4,000? The Neolithic, then you're looking at seemingly around from that point onwards to about 2,200 BC. So those are the kind of time points that we're looking here. Going back a hell of a long time. A hell of a long time. So when people say that, you know, there's not much idea of, you know, who these historic inhabitants of these isles were, completely false. Completely false. And as you can see, going back nearly 2,000 years with the case of the Beachy Head lady, now that we have a good idea of what she looked like, again, good chance that people before her as well, at least then had a good amount of her features, and features that would have been indicative of the males of similar genetic characteristic at that time as well. It's been purely used as a political tool in the modern day to dissociate Britons from their ancestry, and that's played a large part in why so many, simply don't care about Britain today, or they've been able to be indoctrinated into these narratives of diversity, built Britain, and all of these things. It's just not true.
And thereby disrupt senses of belonging. One of the scientists who advised the people who made the facial reconstruction was Tom Booth from
This guy's important.
the Natural History Museum. And in the year before the Cheddar Man fiasco began, he released an article in conjunction with people from UCL.
So, I know I'm pausing the video a lot, but this just to give you an idea. For those of you who aren't watching but might be listening, this article is titled Response to Brexit, Archaeology and Heritage, Reflections and Agendas. Now, what would Brexit have to do with Mesolithic, Neolithic and Roman era Britons? Right? The Brexit, European Union, wasn't a thing. Wasn't a thing back then. What does it have to do with it? Well, Tom's going to tell us in a moment.
And it reveals his biases and that he has a vested interest in preventing the reporting of ancient DNA from reinforcing senses of identity, which he believes feeds into white nationalist narratives or even encouraging the plague of our times, Brexit.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it there a moment because you can tell if it didn't take it out because of the audio, right? The audio improvement methods that I use, it can sometimes take out things like this, right? Tom then sped up his speech to make it sound a lot more high-pitched and nasally than it otherwise was for humorous effect. I'll read this out for you now, because this is extremely important. You see there, again, he didn't want to encourage things like white nationalist narratives or the plague of our time, which is Brexit. Archaeologists need to understand, quoting now, by the way, and if you're watching on screen, you'll see this. Archaeologists need to understand that the complex information contained within news, popular and academic articles in the public domain is being misinterpreted, misused, and used to uphold ultra-racist political beliefs within complex social contexts online. Now, if what Tom is said to be believed here, if what Tom is saying is true, they are guilty of the exact same thing that they are accusing others of. They are guilty of the exact same thing. You know the whole thing when the left accuses you of something, at least in the modern day, when the left accuses you of something, it's also that they are guilty of misinterpreting, misusing the information contained within news, popular academic articles to uphold ultra-race political beliefs within a complex social context online. The complexity of the social context, seemingly in this is being that, ancient Britons weren't African. That's pretty much as far as the complexity goes. That's what the argument will ultimately boil down to, is that they weren't African, and that it wasn't diversity that built Britain. That's about it. And that, since Windrush, which is a very modern thing, right? There's been a massive political betrayal of the British people. That's pretty much as far as the discourse goes. This then goes on. The complicated association between present ethnic identity and ancient DNA is misunderstood, oversimplified, and frequently used to fit into nationalist narratives and support ideas of white supremacy. Again, just assertions, throwing it out there, right? Again, what does white supremacy even mean nowadays? Simply if you advocate for your own people, that's called white supremacy and Nazism. You initially don't want anything bad to happen to anybody who's not native to these isles or anything like that, but you want the injustices that are presently still going on that stem from injustices about 75 to 80 years ago to be resolved, right, in peaceful matters, right? That is, that makes you a white supremacist, apparently. Now, there are people out there that do hold, at least they've expressed it in some ways, narratives that and ideologies that I wouldn't support. There's people out there that call themselves white totalitarians, for example, in which case that they apparently believe that white people are the only race and should be the default race, and i.e. similarly all other races should be eliminated. That's the implication, right? I don't follow that. I don't follow that at all. And the vast majority of people, I believe, don't. Even those who would say that they're nationalists, or at the very least care about their people, want their nations to be made up of people like them, at least in the vast majority, and not feel like foreigners in their own nation. But again, this present ethnic identity and ancient DNA, misunderstood, oversimplified, and frequently used to fit into nationalist narratives, where you could say that they're misunderstood and seemingly oversimplified, or maybe even overcomplicated, to fit into narratives of diversity and globalism. Again, everything that these people accuse nationalists of, or these people of not having the correct political beliefs of doing, then you could accuse them of as well. Now, here's Tom coming in with this bit now to give a little bit more information on where Cheddar Man fits into the overall genetic clusters and maps.
Originally, Europe was populated quite homogeneously with a single basic population of hunter-gatherers that geneticists call Western hunter-gatherers. And whether you take a sample of one of these from Spain or Britain or anywhere else in Western Europe is pretty much the same. There's not a great deal of genetic drift. There's some, but they all form one genetic cluster. There's no living population on Earth today.
So you can see, I'm not really a person that's going to be able to break down this in specific detail, right? I'm assuming this is like a semi-geographical map of where certain clusters of, either one ethnic group or near-related ethnic groups would reside, right? This would be where the British is. And then you had these related clusters all around Europe and so on. In Southern Europe, you had slightly different clusters of people and Sardinians. And obviously then that massively differs as you go out to like West Asia, Iran, the Caucasus, and so on. See that Cheddar Man sort of fits in this blue cluster here, which is very, very close. Very, very close. We're talking about these Western hunter-gatherers being very closely related to the descendants of modern Europeans today, but not quite the same. But again, far from being a sub-Saharan African to suit this diversity-built Britain narrative.
That is exactly in that cluster. They're closer to Northern Europeans than to Southern Europeans, because Northern Europeans today have more genetic similarity, more descent from the original indigenous hunter-gatherers of Europe than Southern Europeans do. No other race in the world has any genetic affinity with them except Europeans.
There you
Not at
go.
all. So we can confidently say Western hunter-gatherers are European people. They're just an archaic type. They have European-shaped nose, European brow ridges, European straight hair. Everything European, but perhaps a darker complexion. That was back in 2018, and it wasn't an isolated incident. And it proves what I was saying, that this is part of a concerted effort to misrepresent prehistoric inhabitants of Europe, specifically Britain in this case, for a political end. Look at what's...
Oh, sorry, I went transition to the wrong one. Oopsies. To dissociate and part of a concerted effort to dissociate the Britons from the ancestral inhabitants of these lands for a political end. So you might have seen a couple of cuts there because I got stumbled over my words a little bit. This is the real big thing that we need to be taken into account and that we need to be really, really concerned about is, again, the points that are made in books like 1984 and Animal Farm as well. In Animal Farm, you have the pigs. They have the 7 commandments of Animal Farm. You know, everything that goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. No animal will ever sleep in a bed. No animal will kill another animal. Those kinds of things, right? There's the 7 commandments, right? And gradually then you see them getting rewritten, eliminated as the pigs consolidate more and more of their power. They even have a little nod to what would, in theory, be like a state school system where the next litter of puppies Napoleon takes straight away whilst they're extremely young up into the attic, and you never see them again until a very pivotal point later on, right? I won't spoil it because I got a big video on it coming. So I'm just rereading it, making all notes and stuff like that because I wanted to do occult feminism as well. It's just taking me a little bit longer to get everything ready for that. So I'm going to do Animal Farm. It's a much shorter book, much less additional reading that's required, you know, to go and check all the sources in Rachel's work and all stuff like that and try and get all the data together. It takes a long time. So I want to get Animal Farm out there, hopefully before Christmas. We shall see, or at least a bit before the new year. Anyway, there's a big video on that coming. But how they go back and rewrite history, they rewrite the commandments. And the biggest thing, when the animals know, or when the animals seem to have the greatest evidence that they've been conned by the pigs, is when the only commandment that is left is that all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Now, again, in 1984, you see the whole memory holding system where things get sent to the party officials. They put them in the memory hole, or they go back and they talk into the speak right, like I'm talking to the microphone, right? Imagine I'm saying instructions, or, you know, in Newspeak, talking about a correction that needs to be made to this newspaper from way back when because this new information is whatever, to go back and retroactively change the past so that they were always right, even though pretty much everything they were always wrong on, right? You know, they do it in big ways to rewrite that this person was always our historic enemy when in reality 5 minutes ago they were your friend, right? You know, like East Asia and Eurasia and all of these things, right? It's really, really important that when you change the past, right? When you change the past, or when in a dishonest way, it's very likely the person doing so is not doing so for good intentions. And that's what Tom's highlighted here. In this instance, the narratives that have been pushed and the things that have happened in Britain have been, people look on in horror in the rest of the world. People look on in horror at what's going on in Britain. And, you know, when the Prime Minister comes out and makes a big gaffe or goes on about free speech and all of this stuff, you know, people laugh or people guffaw and all of these things. But it's horrifying what's going on. But it's us as people that have allowed it. It's us that decide when all of this stops. You know, like anybody that's addicted to something, the first step comes with acknowledging that you have a problem, but not just acknowledging that you have a problem, acknowledging that you need to do something about it. And with that comes the acknowledgement that the way you've been doing things now is not working, right? And you'll find this in every aspect of life. If you tried a business, you tried setting up a business or whatever it was, and it didn't work. Okay, something went wrong. You need to go back and reassess why it was. Maybe the market was wrong. Just wrong space for it. Maybe it wasn't needed. Maybe there was staff that were hired that you could have done better in your research to find out who they were or whatever. Better business model, taking into account more financial things, whatever. Obviously, I'm not a business expert, but the point of analyzing. Point of really analyzing what went wrong, and year on year, month on month, quarter on quarter, and so on. Things aren't going well. But you have to admit that first off, things are not good. And it's getting to the point now where unless Westerners, unless Britons, and as we'll get onto in a moment with the next story, Australia, the Australians do so, at least acknowledging that political leaders are not out for you. They are out for you. They're out to get you, right? And that they don't want what's best for you. They want to subjugate you. Everything this has been by design and deliberate. And that you deserve better, you deserve more. And it's only going to come, from real attitudes changing. And when we decide that enough is enough. And you do have some good political representatives, don't get me wrong. Seems that our best in Parliament at the moment are people like Rupert Lowe, for example. He's pretty much single-handedly leading the way on any kind of nationalist, if you not even, I don't even know if he'd say that he was a nationalist, right? But patriotic venture. He's pretty much the only one that's leading the way at this moment in time. But stops when we say it does. And some of the biggest attitudes that we need to change on in Britain are particularly around speech, around who the British are, right? Around who the British are. And one of the biggest ones as well, which manifested itself clearly in the Bondi shooting, things like private gun ownership and actually restoring some elements of freedoms to the British people, and not saying that, the best solution is going to be more slavery. It never is. That gets us on to the Bondi shooting. There's many more things that I wanted to go over with the Bondi shooting, because there's so much that could be talked about more with how atrocious it was and with how likely preventable it was, and also with the biggest point that I saw people dialing in on, which I thought was important to go over. One of the biggest points was just the lack of urgency with the shooters. And when you think about that, stricter gun laws and all of these things, I'm just trying to find the clip of the shooter with the really good clip of the close-up action of him with the bolt action, right? There was a complete lack of urgency with the shooters. They were taking their time. They used a bolt action, which obviously you need to then chamber the round manually in between every shot. They weren't running around realizing that they were on, the clock, right? With the police response and everything like that seemingly being completely lackluster. I'll see if I can find the clip and I'll put it in post. I can't find it at the moment. There's no words to describe the atrocity that's been inflicted on the Australians in this, and how this is the biggest example. So you cannot trust your authorities when it comes to things like this. And if they say that they're taking means of defense away from you for your own safety, it's more often than not, metaphorically speaking, I want to make this the case of turning metaphorically now, that it's probably those people that you need to turn your weapons upon and say, no, I'm keeping this. You're taking this from me from my cold, dead hands. Okay? I want to make it clear. That was not a call for anybody with a gun to go out and start turning their guns on their political representatives. That wasn't what that was. But that was a case of, if somebody tells you that they're taking a tool of your defense away from you so that you'll be safer, right, when you're not doing anything wrong, that person probably doesn't have your best intentions at heart, is what I'm saying. It doesn't have your safety at heart. The political leaders of Australia and the Western world have imported these threats en masse to our countries and then said to defend yourself is a crime. That is treason. That is treason. And they say, it's okay, we'll protect you, the police will do it. We've got counter-terrorism and all of this stuff. Well, we've seen how politicised those agencies can be. Again, like Napoleon having the monopoly on the kids' education and turning them into his personal attack dogs later on in the story. Well, that's what's happened with the police. That's what's happened with our forces. That's what happened with counter-terrorism. Tell me this, right? Now tell me why they're planning on potentially deploying counter-terrorism to deal with misogyny in the UK because of Andrew Tate. All right, not a great guy, obviously. They're planning on using counter-terrorism against Andrew Tate influence. Where was the counter-terrorism when there was the Britain going on, and still is the Britain going on? Where's the SAS going into Pakistani communities and dealing with these dens? Can't do that. It's racist. That's offensive. It's perfectly okay to turn counter-terrorism against your own people, though. Against the young boys of this generation, which already have every single thing stacked against them. And many of the people within the education system, many of whom are the vindictive feminists who've already had a bent for these kids right from the get-go and doing everything possible to destroy their minds and have these young boys believe that they are patriarchal oppressors and they want to so much as exhibit the slightest boyish, mannerism, right? They're growing up with every single thing stacked against them and people relishing it. So imagine the generation you're going to breed coming from that. It can go one of two ways. Neither of which would be ideal, should we say. But this is now Bondi survivor Vanessa Miller. Because she was separated from her 3-year-old daughter and pinned down by the gunfire. There was a police officer, which was alleged to have been critically injured. She doesn't say whether he was in the actual thing, but the open source page said that he was critically injured. Tried to grab the officer's gun to stop the attackers, but then she was restrained by police and told no. Now, is it a smart thing and a good thing to reach for an officer's gun? No. No, obviously not. Let's just say that, right? For all the police know in this instance, you might be trying to use the gun on them, right? But again, police seem to be doing their job. When the shooter was firing up on the bridge as the hero, right, which there's been some debate still of whether it's a Christian Maronite or a Muslim, right, does appear to be a Muslim. Even what happened later on, which was quite interesting, I'll see if I can find the news article and bring it up. Apparently, according to New York Post, I believe it was, the hero of Bondi, the one who disarmed but did not fire on one of the terrorists, was called a traitor by Muslim communities. How interesting was that? He intervened to stop Jews and was called a traitor. How interesting was that? And they were quick enough to restrain Vanessa here, who was actually going to pick up a gun and go and try and eliminate the threat, right? But the police were like, no. She had some choice words for them, which I think would resonate with quite a few people in this instance.
These police officers were hiding behind a car. I tried to grab one of their guns. One of the other one grabs and he says, no, I'm trying to grab for his gun. These men, these police officers, they know who I am, and I hope they're hearing this. You are weak. You could have saved so many more people's lives. They were just standing there, listening and watching this all happen, holding me back. 2 police officers. Where are the others? Not there. Nobody was there. Everyone, the public, helped. Nobody else. My little 3-year-old was saved by a pregnant woman who saw her crying and screaming, Mummy, Daddy. We were there. There was not. Do you know how long did it take for police to come? How long did it take?
It was just...
No one, everyone was too scared.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is, sorry, I thought there was more to this clip. The biggest thing is that people don't understand with the police. She asked the final question before that clip just ended. How long did it take the police to come? The biggest thing is that no amount of police response time will be enough to account for things like this. Because when something is about to happen, the only people that can deal with it in that moment are the people there in that moment. Chief among them, the intended victim. If you're home alone and somebody breaks in with bad intentions, whether it's to steal, whether it's to murder, who is the only person that you can rely on in that moment? It's you, if you were the intended victim. You can't rely on police because you got to phone police. The only way you can rely on police is if a police cruiser happens to be driving by at that exact time, which the odds are basically nil, right? We're constantly told we have to cut back on police spending because police are institutionally racist and all these things. So odds are you're not going to have a police officer either walking or driving by your home the minute they see a violent assailant break in, and odds are they're probably just going to tell you to surrender anyway. You have to call the police. You have to go through the call handler. You have to give where you are. You have to give your name. All of these different things, right? Then have to explain what's going on. You know, why you need police and so on. Obviously, you have to go through an automated service before this to even get to the point where you get to a call handler. How much time would have passed before that happens? Likely enough for the assailant or for the thief to make off with whatever he wanted, and now he's going to make off into that he's never going to be found again. Likely. Or, if you're hiding up in, like, the wardrobe of your bedroom, for example, odds are it's probably not going to take him very long to find that house. And also, oh, you're talking on the phone, you're making noise, he can follow that. And then he finds you. And what have you got to defend yourself? Your phone. That's probably it, unless you were smart and you got something else and took it into the wardrobe with you. But even then, confined space, he's already close, he's already in close contact, very easy to then grab it and stop you from using it, especially if it's a male on female. It's already an uneven battlefield. And then God knows what's going to happen. Police aren't going to be able to stop that. Police are not going to be able to stop that. They can't. All the police can do is turn up afterwards and try and pick up the pieces or whatever a lot of the time. Or in many instances, they get there, 16 people have lost their lives. Imagine if every person there was armed, encouraged to own a gun. It was a gun-friendly culture. They were a moral and upright people. And the minute there were shots going out, a whole army of Australians swarmed on them and eliminated the threat right then and there. A civilian militia, if you will. How many lives would have been saved? Think about it. We can't see about mass shootings, all of this stuff. Left don't like it when it's not people that they don't like. It's fine when it's a school shooting and it's a white person. They don't like it when it's a church shooting and it's a trans person, or it's a mass shooting in Sydney and it's radical Muslims. How many, according to people like Stephen Crowder, who I often see as, giving quite a lot of data to support this. I'll see if I can find a clip and link it down below. That in America, where these debates often happen, especially around mass shootings and stuff like that, is constant, Second Amendment conversations and stuff like that. But when you look at things like defensive uses of firearms versus mass shootings and all of those things, you see actually how many crimes that they're stopped by it. And how many of these mass shootings actually occur within gun-free zones. To the best of my knowledge, is actually over 90% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, as far as I'm aware. If anybody has any conflicting data, let me know down below. This is only what I've heard. The best argument you can make is that guns save more lives than they take in these fashions. And if you had an armed populace who are already sick and tired of these people, evidenced by the fact that they went in through pig carcasses, pig heads at a Muslim gravesite, the Western world, right? So you're talking Western countries again, even going as far down as Australia, New Zealand, all these places are fit to blow. They would deal with this problem themselves. The government won't let them because the government wants this problem. The government needs this problem now. They can't do what's in the best interest of their own civilians because their own civilians, their own citizens, want their blood as well. They want the blood of people like Anthony Albanese, as I get onto in a moment. Talking about police, though, it's quite an interesting one for you, ladies and gentlemen. Quite an interesting one for you. Pardon me. New York Post. New York Post published a story, right? Titled, I'll see if I can get it to load now, Bondi Beach hero helped disarm terrorists before police mistakenly shot him. This is apparently Bondi's best and brightest. Bondi's finest, shooting civilians that are helping them, ostensibly, right? So this is another guy that has only been identified as a Middle Eastern refugee living in Australia. He helped disarm one of the gunmen after he had been shot. I believe it was after Sajid had been shot. He ran over the bridge. And kicked the gun away from the gunman so that he would not be able to grab it if he was able to recover. Right? One of the gunmen that had been shot and dropped his rifle. After that, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to open this. Why is that not opening? There we go. After that, then, he turned away from the shooter, got down on his knees on the bridge, held his arms in the air, and shouted, "Don't shoot," multiple times. Here's that image. This is the guy, the Middle Eastern refugee in the middle of the photo. He's ran over the bridge whilst this is still going on, right? Kicked the gun away out of arm's reach from the gunman that I believe has just been incapacitated. I believe it was Sajid that got shot by the cop who, with his 40-meter pistol shot, managed to take him down. And after that, he turns around, gets on his knees, hands in the air, shouts, "Don't shoot." They say civilians can't be trusted with guns, ladies and gentlemen, because of lack of training or whatever else. The police continued to shoot. And he was shot during the scene that followed. And because members of the public, which in this instance probably can be excused, they run in and attacked him because they mistook him for they mistook the hero for one of the assailants. Okay, you could say that's fairly easy to do, especially if they're all Middle Eastern men, right? And then the police then did run in to break up the scene and secure the area. But this guy ran in, disarmed one of the gunmen because he kicked the gun away, turned around, surrendered, said "Don't shoot," and then got shot by police for his trouble. Not looking good for the Bondi police here, ladies and gentlemen. Looking very good for the individual heroes that we had on that day. The guy who was alleged name is Ahmed, right, who was labelled as a traitor because he disarmed one of the gunmen. This one because he ran up, done a heroic action kicking the gun away. And also Boris and Sophia German. Two that actually lost their lives. Trying to disarm one of the terrorists, I believe it was Sajid, before he was able to go on his massacre, having seen his car with the ISIS flag in it and him getting out with the rifle. I believe then they got out and Bob actually tried to intervene, disarm him. Sadly, both of them then ended up losing their lives because they were unsuccessful in this effort and they both got shot and killed with heartbreaking footage, I believe, showing them as basically bleeding out right next to each other in the middle of the street. The blood in these instances, ladies and gentlemen, I'll play this clip over the top just so you can see the video. The video will be down the bottom. In this instance, and Bob and Sophia are pictured on top. This is dash cam footage. You can see here, coming up by here. This is where they're falling here. This is Bob tackling and scuffling with the gunman, who I believe is Sajid. You can see his wife just in the background behind the car door. So they've realised what's going on. Then they've tried to disarm him. The video is buffering for some reason. It appears to have been sorted now, hopefully. This is the second part of that video, then showing another angle of the same incident. This is Bob and the gunman tangling with each other. I believe he actually has the weapon in this instance, but I'm not sure. Right? And not long after that, they were shot. And they both lost their lives. This is blood on the hands of Anthony Albanese and every Western leader that has inflicted this cancer upon our nations and then said that if we treat the cancer, if we want tools to deal with the cancer or at least prevent ourselves from becoming a victim of it, then you are labelled racist, you're labelled, in many instances, you be probably on a terrorist watch list yourself. And you wonder why so many when people have been warning about it for so long. Say on about them, Nick Griffin, Enoch Powell, all of these figures that have been warning about it for so long. Joel Davis, the National Socialist Network out there. You want to drive more people right into the arms of the Nationalist Socialist Network in Australia? You could not have picked a better way to do it with the government's response to what happened in Bondi. There's actually another hero of this incident, though, ladies and gentlemen, which also deserves our attention. A faithful dog. If you wonder why I trust a dog far more than actually most people, but also pretty much any of our political leaders, because of things like this. On the Sydney Bondi shooting, there was a Bernese mountain dog named Maui, stood over her owner's body after the horrific attack at Bondi Beach on Sunday. This is from Wales Online. Refused to leave despite the gunfire, that was heard. So this here is the image. I'll just bring this, can I not bring this up on full screen? Hang on a minute, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. It's not a very high quality image, but this here, you can see, is the Bernese mountain dog by the name of Maui, who, when the gunfire was heard, her owner was actually struck and tragically killed, refused to leave her owner's body, despite being terrified, despite the ongoing slaughter and despite the ongoing, gunfire. Until then, she was eventually reunited with the owner's family, and obviously, sadly, the owner then lost her life, I believe, or lost his life. So, victim of the horrific anti-Semitic attack at Bondi Beach perpetrated by a father and son duo, was guarded in his final moments by his loyal dog, who steadfastly refused to leave his side. Heart-wrenching new footage has emerged showing a Bernese mountain dog standing guard over the body of his deceased owner following Sunday's attack. The assailants opened fire on celebrating the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, resulting in the tragic loss of at least 16 lives. One of those who died was the gunman who was shot by police. That's not a tragic loss. Let's face it, that's not a tragic loss at all. The massacre continued to send shockwaves to Australia and beyond. Now, a distressing video taken at the scene as Mergit depicts Maui, the Bernese, in a state of panic amidst the gunfire, yet resolutely refusing to abandon her owner. And then later on, the dog was then reunited with the family. The dog is now with the victim's wife. This goes to show that it seems at least if you have a dog, in this instance, it cares about you and will protect you a lot better than your government and police will. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? When, you had the images that have been circulating of the female police officers with their hands in the air and hiding behind things, not doing anything, stopping civilians from, dealing with the problem that they seem to have more courage in dealing with, right? Get a dog. Get a dog if you don't have one, would be my advice. Unless you can't afford it. Okay, fair enough. Unless you can't afford it, right? Financial audit. Don't make bad financial decisions and all of these things. Get that. They called man's best friend for a reason. Evidently, Maui here was a lot better at sticking by his owner's side than his government was. As proven by Anthony Albanese's responses to this massacre, which can be exactly what you would expect. Stricter gun laws, despite the fact they already had a buyback in the late 90s where they confiscated mandatory about 650,000 firearms. Crackdown on hate speech and right-wing extremism, and doing everything possible but dealing with the actual problem. Despite the fact that the Islamic State as well have called the Bondi shooting a source of pride. But you won't see him commenting on that as reason to think, how many of those supporters do we have in this country? And at what point do we have to start questioning people's allegiances depending on where they come from in this world? Here's one of the things that Anthony Albanese had to say. Apparently, according to Albanese, diversity is a strength, and that's actually what Australians want to see.
When you come to Australia, you are here to support our society, of which is diverse, but that diversity is a strength. And that is what overwhelmingly Australians want to see. When you come...
I think they want to see Australian societies again. I think, especially after this, they're going to be a lot more sick and tired of multiculturalism and diversity. They look at all the other examples which they can see across the world, the Britain, the takeover of Minnesota and Michigan by Muslims and Somalis and so on, the takeover of Europe by Muslims and other ethnic groups that openly champion the colonization and takeover of those nations, and how the leaders of those nations have stabbed their people in the back at every single turn. And they'll see that it's happening to them as well, and they'll see that there were people actually warning about it. They'll see that people whose even politics they may be in vast disagreement to, at least will write on this, and at least seem to have some solutions that massively go against what the government has said, that have directly enabled this. And maybe they'll think, maybe it's not Albanese I should be listening to on this. It's people like him that have inflicted this upon our societies. Maybe I should start looking elsewhere for political solutions, so that people stop getting shot by radical terrorists, who then many terrorist groups will actually say is a source of pride. Here's that clip from Sky News in the UK, I believe.
You're watching Sky News Today. Just to bring you a little bit of breaking news coming in via the Reuters news agency in relation to that attack that we saw in Australia, in Sydney at the weekend on Bondi Beach. Well, the Islamic State has published an article on its Telegram channel in which it essentially says it was a source of pride. It has effectively backed, if you like, that attack on the Jewish festival, that shooting that saw more than a dozen people murdered. They've also essentially kind of backed, if you like, the action that was taken, but have not claimed responsibility for it. But they have.
So they didn't claim responsibility for it, but still appreciate when just regular people like this go and do it anyway. And just the regular people go and do, the acts of terror anyway. You think how many people are just going to go and do it? How many people lie to get into this country that then go on to do these heinous things? Even in the little things as well, ladies and gentlemen, which have been making the rounds as well. This came out today. I believe this was pictured at some kind of shopping facility. Looks to be in Israel, I believe. Judging by that, it says it has some Hebrew writing on the billboard here. Is it in Donetsk? It looks like it might be in Donetsk. I'm not sure. It's a shopping facility, and if the person posting this is correct, right, this doesn't appear to be in honor of the Bondi victims, but at the very least, a menorah was lit, right, in the shopping center. Somebody in the comment section did say that it was in Israel. So whether it was actually lit for the victims of Bondi is in question. But usual suspect in this instance goes up to the menorah and, well, does what you can imagine. I'll show you on screen. Again, important to remember, even if you don't like Jewish people, even if you don't like Judaism, even if you don't like any of these things, right, that these people are not your friends. She comes up to the menorah, starts blowing out the candles, and the guy actually applauds it. Like you see here, I don't think this is in Bondi, because again, why would Bondi have Hebrew writing on its posters, on its billboards, on its electronic boards, But then again, many areas of England and other places now have Arabic and Urdu, right? So maybe you don't know. Say you don't know, but apparently this is in Israel. Whether it was lit for the victims of Bondi, I do not know. But blowing out the candles at the menorah, and they cheer it on. Multiculturalism. Diversity is a strength, ladies and gentlemen. And obviously, the predictable response from Albanese and the other cronies in the Australian government will be, as you can imagine, in the aftermath of everything to do with this, the Norm Macdonald joke when a terrorist attack happens, and like, oh, can you imagine the pushback against peaceful Muslims? Australia launches radical crackdown on hate speech after the Bondi Beach attack. Yes, it's not the crime, it's not the shooting, the problem, it's the response. It's always the response. It's always what people are going to say about it. It wasn't Southport that was the atrocity. It was Lucy Connolly's social media posts afterwards. Right? That's always the big atrocity of Southport. The fact that there was, again, another case of a radical Islamic terrorist, an African, not a Welshman, going and really viciously slaughtering 3 young girls in Southport. All right. Oh, if only he had another youth club. If only he'd had another youth club, you know. If only there was another extracurricular football session. No, it's the social media posts and what people say about it that come afterwards. Because obviously the one thing which they really want to police is public discourse and people's responses to these things. Because that's what they're really scared of. The country could soon wield the power to cancel visas for those who spread division. For those who spread division. How dare they? How dare they want their country back, they might say. How dare they want to see justice for these atrocities? How dare they might want to see their political leaders held to account? How dare they? Australia has launched a radical crackdown on quote-unquote hate speech. Again, the completely subjective term, ladies and gentlemen, which I bring this article up on screen for you now. The completely subjective term, because obviously hate speech is a completely subjective legislation, because funny this, people hate different things. Not everybody hates the same thing. It's impossible then to put an objective definition on something like hate. That's why one use terms like evil a lot of the time. They use it like hate because they can try and pass it off. Oh, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. They can try and pass it off as an objective criteria. Bear with me. I just want to reorder this so that I can actually crop it a little bit better. There we are. Not sure how that happened. But here you go. According to GB News, Australia has launched a radical crackdown on hate speech after the deadly Bondi mass shooting on Sunday. The Hanukkah attack claimed the lives of 15 people, and in an address on Thursday, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced a string of planned reforms to target those who spread hate, division and radicalisation. What are the areas he's targeting? Oh, a new aggravated hate speech offence for preachers and leaders who promote violence. Yeah, will we be seeing Mr. Anthony Albanese, right? Will we be seeing Mr. Albanese going into, the mosques and places like that to deal with the radical hate preaching? No, of course not. That would be Islamophobic. That would be insensitive. That would be racist. That would be all of these other things. So no, it's going to apply to those who oppose the multiculturalism and diversity narratives, right? As always, as you'll see, the problem is going to be advocating racial supremacy. Many of these people actually do, mind you. The gang excerpts, the fact that, the religion then also plays a role in this as well. Harsher penalties for hate speech which promotes violence. Hate made an aggravating factor in sentencing crimes for online threats and harassment. In fact, hate will be involved in all crimes. You commit crime as a result of hate for the law, right? Because if you didn't hate the law, you'd follow it. Developing a blacklist for groups whose leaders engage in hate speech promoting violence or racial hatred. Wonder what Anthony Albanese would have to say about the racially motivated gangs. And developing a new federal offence for serious vilification based on race and or advocating racial supremacy. Again, I wonder what he would have to say for, again, many of the that called them white and say that this is what white girls are for and all of this stuff. But obviously, the biggest thing is, ladies and gentlemen, the real threat in these people's eyes is the quote-unquote far right. It's a political response, right? And as I said, you're doing things here. If you wanted to drive people into the arms of the Nationalist Socialist Network, into the arms of what could be considered the real far right, you could not be doing a better job than literally by giving people who are sick and tired of the same old, more of the same old, right? Danger is right now the system that's already in place, right, is very similar to the initial system that's in place in Animal Farm. And after one of these revolutions take place, you have no real idea on how it's going to go. It seems as though if you replace, one socialist system, all while obviously talking about the communist revolution with serious parallels to Russia, but when it does seem in many ways when these revolutions take place and you have many of the same systems, right, just being used in the opposite way, you seem to then create, again, just the same system, but in the opposite. Then you have to have the debate on, is that any better, right? I certainly think that many people are starting to think that. And I've had that conversation with myself many, many times, that if I had to choose between one extreme or the other extreme, which extreme would I go for? think it's a pretty clear answer. I think it's a pretty easy question to answer, to be honest. I think it's a very, very easy question to answer. You push people more and more into the arms of people like the Nationalist Socialist Network when these attacks happen, rather than admitting what people can see with their eyes is the source of the problem, and you can't because you're directly complicit in it. You blame people that really had nothing to do with it, and the people who were actually trying to warn people about this. When people see that you will willfully ignore the true causes of what is causing them intense pain and ruining their societies, you will push them more and more into the arms of the people you claim to be against.
Just briefly, to be clear, your priority from National Cabinet in relation to the gun laws, what is the number one priority for you?
I would put them all together, making sure that they operate effectively and that they're kept up to date and that they're updated for the changing threat. We live in a more dangerous world in 2025. The threat of anti-Semitism, as we have seen, is very real. Threats.
Why? Why do we live in a more dangerous society in 2025? Why? Answer that question. Yeah, it's quick enough going to anti-Semitism, right? What about British, for example? How about the British who are living in the most dangerous British society they've ever known? Why is it? You can't answer that question, can you?
Of other occurrences, such as the rise in the far right, which has also been identified, of course, by Mike Burgess, is also a threat as well.
Just briefly, to be clear.
Absolutely despicable. Blood on his hands. No mention. Islam, Muslims, right? No mention of the terrorism, at least in this clip anyway. Pardon me. Absolutely despicable. Every single casualty, injured and dead, right? Every single innocent person on that day is on Anthony Albanese's hands. The blood of that person, the blood of those people, is on Anthony Albanese's hands. Similar as the blood, the innocence, and the trauma of every single victim of the Pakistani gangs, predominantly Pakistani gangs, call them foreign gangs, call them foreign Muslim gangs and other gangs, right? All on the hands of government officials that have directly imported these threats, made it a crime to notice them or say anything about them, and then pretend that they are not happening. Because it's not them, or very rarely it will be them, that will be in the firing line. It'll be regular people like you and me, who they also despise, who they couldn't give a shit if they lost their lives, because, it's probably someone who would have voted the wrong way anyway. That's treason. That's treason, ladies and gentlemen. It makes you think maybe we should go back to the old ways of punishing things like treason. It's especially despicable when it comes from one of your own. And there's no feeling quite like betrayal in that regard that leaves such a disgusting taste in the mouth. That's why so many people are so disgusted, so revolted, so angry with their government and with their elected officials. Because it's not just incompetence, and they know it. It's betrayal. It's betrayal after betrayal after betrayal after trust after trust after trust. And the reason why you're seeing so much anger, so much vitriol, is because in the modern day you're seeing the radicalization that comes from that going on in Britain, for example, for nearly 100 years. That's a long time to build up a lot of grievances long time to build up a lot of resentment. And when you see that it's not going to change, outside of seemingly being forced, then you can understand people for getting extremely, extremely angry. And then you wonder why in the 1930s a certain little mustache man was so popular. So one thing you can't say is that people didn't have genuine grievances at the time, like the people of today have a lot of genuine grievances, such as something that Anthony Albanese would never mention if he was a representative over in Britain. Muslim gangs taking control of one of Britain's most drug-ridden and violent prisons, watchdogs have learned from the Daily Mail. Muslim gangs hold sway at one of the most violent and drug-ridden prisons in Britain. Watchdogs have warned Chief Inspector of Prisons Charlie Taylor has received an urgent notification from for HMP Swaleside in Kent after discovering dangerously unsafe conditions for prisoners and staff in an unannounced visit earlier this month. Mr. Taylor said the prison was filthy, rife with drugs, and had a pervasive sense of despair, leading him to give it the worst scores of any jail in my 5 years as Chief Inspector. The jail's independent monitoring board previously raised concerns about quote-unquote religious gangs at the facility where a third of the inmates are Muslim. So again, things that Tommy Robinson was telling us about, regardless of what you think about him, this has definitely borne fruit, because he was saying that, you know, a lot of the prisons are simply run by these gangs, right? And not only that, that thought criminals, people who do wrong speak, and other criminals who are, say, of native British descent will get served up to these gangs on a platter, and they're literally making examples out of them so that they never, ever sway from the politically correct orthodoxy again. You do not hate your government enough, ladies and gentlemen. A recurring theme is the perception of widespread violence, including bullying by both prisoners and staff, as well as unchecked gang control, particularly by religious gangs, which many prisoners report feeling powerless and unsafe against. There was evidence of rival gangs fighting over drugs, racist comments and discrimination against Jewish prisoners, no surprise. IMB described violence as a constant theme, and the manufacturing of blades on site ominous. There were 107 assaults on staff over a 3-month period, with 70% of officers giving instructions, and 6 inmates were attacked on their first nights in prison. Diversity is our strength, ladies and gentlemen. Multiculturalism in a diverse society is such a great thing. Such a great thing. Imagine this where thought criminals and stuff like that are going to be going. The government gets their way. They're just going to be the gulags, right? And you get served up on a platter for these people whom the government, they won't care if they do away with you in prison. That's another troublesome voter. Who cares if it's someone's son? Who cares if it's someone's father or brother? Who gives a f***? That's how the government thinks, because it's another way of consolidating their power and ensuring that the politically correct orthodoxy stays alive, which, all of this stuff, ladies and gentlemen, this is how you know it's bringing us to breaking point. In Britain, in Europe, in all of these other countries, right? Where you see this massive nationalist lurch to the right. We now are facing calls for an emergency census as soon as next year, demanded as a response to an increased threat of religious extremism. Oh, I wonder where that's coming from. I wonder where that's coming from. Hint, it's not Russia. It's not from the Orthodox Christians in Russia. Right? And that's not a statement in support of Putin either. Think of that next time the war hawks want you to go and die in Russia, right? All the while now your home country is facing calls for emergency census because, at least according to GB News, massive waves of migration that have brought 3.9 plus million people to Britain were not able to be accounted for in the 2021 census. Those who think, like myself, that our census maps are already massively out of date, I think have very good reason to think that that is true. Especially when, a lot of times, what we see lining up in our own communities doesn't seem to jive with what the census maps seem to say. Now, are they still currently our best source of information? Yeah, I'm not aware of any other better sources of information. But if we are facing calls now for an emergency census, as soon as next year? What does that tell you about the current census maps that we have? That the problems are a lot more progressed than we actually think that they are. And that if we do not act extremely quickly, right? If we do not change our attitudes extremely quickly, it could be, you know, the next generation or two where our country and our civilization will be completely unsalvageable. We are in the 11th hour of a genocidal threat. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not say that lightly. Please share this video. Make a note of the timestamp and get people to skip to this point. That they should know that next year there's been calls for an emergency census because of the threat of rising religious extremism that is inextricably tied with immigration. And that something really needs to be done about it. And it's quite simple, ladies and gentlemen. The thing that needs to be done about it is not simply just turning the tap off at this point. That's what needs to be done first. The bath is going to need to be drained and the floor swept up. And that's going to mean a lot of people are going to need to be sent back to their country of ancestral origin. That is just the reality. Net migration reached a record 944,000 in the year to March 2023. So I think it was in the year March 2022 to 2023, thanks to the Boris wave, and it came just a little too late for the 2021 census record. Since 2021, Britain's population has expanded by 3.4%, equivalent to adding the combined populations of Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool. Certain cities have experienced growth of up to 10% within 3 years. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We are dying. Our birth rates are far below replacement. We have not been replenishing that. That is not because of us. That is because of foreigners. And you wonder why the customs, you wonder why the very fabric of the society starts changing. Because you change the people, you change the nation. It's just the reality. Wake up, Welshmen. Wake up, Britishman. This is, make no mistake about it, this is really the 11th hour. We have precious little time to do anything about this. The number one thing that you can really try and do, as I said, is at least make people aware of this, right? By sharing this video, going down into the sources, sharing those, talk about them as well, share the out of them. It's really the only thing that we can do. We don't have much time. We do not have much time at all. Now, speaking of changing people, changing the nation, looks like slavery might have made its way back to the UK. It wasn't a quite interesting thing that happened. It's not because of, as you might be thinking, it's not because of the evil white man, however. No. It's not because of the evil white man. That's what no doubt that's what the media would want you to believe, right? In this instance, it is a councillor of what I believe is East Lancashire, a Greens councillor of all people. A Greens councillor has given away the whip in his constituency because of a probe into slavery. So as the councillor that was elected to represent Accrington West and Oswald Twistle Central, it's a hell of a name that is, on the authority of the Green Party in May, now the 29-year-old has voluntarily relinquished the Green Party whip at County Hall while the investigation proceeds. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right. Who is the... Again, biggest thing to mention here as we'll go through now. The relinquishing of the whip came after police arrested him and 2 others last month as part of an investigation into modern slavery allegations. Mr. Drumroll please, Councillor Sohail Asghar. Ooh, not looking good for the Greens. Not looking good for Rachel Millwall. Refugees welcome, but not in my constituency, though. You know, Zach Polanski, the treasonous, traitorous scumbag that was literally over in Calais facilitating the invasion. And oh no, one of their councillors pulled up on modern slavery allegations. Ooh, doesn't appear to be a good couple of days to be a Green. So yeah, Councillor Sohail Asghar was elected to represent Accrington West and Oswald Twistle Central Division on the authority of the Green Party in May. Makes question the demographic makeup of that place, but again, don't have the data to hand on that point. Now the 29-year-old has voluntarily relinquished the Green Party whip at County Hall while the investigation proceeds. Following his arrest earlier this month, right? Him and 2 others have been arrested as part of an investigation into modern slavery allegations. I wonder what the lefties would have to say about this. Police, I believe, made repeated attempts to contact Councillor Asghar by phone, email and Facebook without a response. It says, we have arrested 3 people as part of an investigation into alleged modern slavery in Accrington. A 29-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of slavery, servitude or forced compulsory labour and common assault. A 51-year-old woman has also been arrested on suspicion of slavery, servitude and forced or compulsory labour. And a 55-year-old man from Accrington has been arrested on suspicion of slavery, servitude and forced or compulsory labour and making threats to kill. All 3 suspects have currently been bailed, but, how interesting. Would he have to, again, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Let's make that perfectly clear. But is it a case of maybe he's trying to save the party optics or anything like that? Because obviously the Green Party will remain committed to their cause, which he will still support, right? Again, makes you think, if he's innocent, why wouldn't he fight a little bit more for that position? You might think it's a question you may have, right? Now, he might be innocent. He might be innocent, obviously, but we shall see. We shall see. Kind of interesting, though, that, again, you can kind of get caught between a weird place, you know? You don't want to have people have the whip removed too early for some things, like we saw the whole thing with Reform blowing up, and Rupert Lowe, obviously, it was very, very different. But oftentimes, you know, until an investigation is concluded, especially if somebody's leveling their innocence or whatever, that they are innocent of this, right? It's not good necessarily for their party or for their representatives to then turn on them and remove the whip and things like this, right? It kind of shows that they weren't willing to back that person. The minute anybody gets involved in things, they kind of have this thing where you're guilty until proven innocent, right? And then your own party takes that approach, which you want to think your party would have your back, right? If your friend gets up at a bar, or if somebody gets up and gets in your friend's face at a bar, you get up and stand by him, right? And then figure out what happens later. Right, after the whole thing is done, then you figure out where to go from there, whether they still remain as a part of your group or whether they don't or whatever. But in that moment, when that person is facing either some kind of prosecution or some kind of persecution from the state, whatever it is, right, whether it's just or not, until it's proven, you know, in that moment, you stand by them. So I can understand in this instance maybe not retracting the whip the minute these things came in. But again, you don't just arrest people for no reason, right? That's why the law's been set up the way they are when people make inflammatory social media posts or things that are deemed as inflammatory social media posts. They brought in all these, again, non-crime hate incidents and all of these things. They try to bring it in to get around it, to give these additional legal powers and stuff like that. But typically, especially on things like modern slavery, don't get arrested with no reason. So we shall see. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, but dare I say that we may understand where this is going. Not a good day to be a Green anyway. So we'll see where this goes, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see where this goes, but are we surprised? Are we surprised? The left were always the ones that were championing slavery, mind you. Obviously, there's this great kind of switch that happened now where, it's, again, the left, like the Democrats and like the left was saying around all the times of slavery, we need them to pick the crops, we need them to pick the cotton, who's going to do the jobs that Brits and Americans don't want to do because we can pay them less and they'll work for slavery wages and all of these things, right? They were always the slave driving mentality. They were always the slave driving mentality, and it hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed. Now, this is something which is very, very important to go through, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get on to the last couple of stories of today, because I wanted to share this. You might have to go over on Rumble to watch this. I might have to cut this entire section from YouTube. I don't know. Wes Reading has rejected calls to stop the puberty blocker trial, which we should not be we should not be surprised by it, right? So what's happened is that Health Secretary Wes Reading has rejected calls to stop a trial of puberty blocking drugs for gender questioning children, right? Instead of, again, focusing on giving them psychological help, like I talked about with James S's, for example, the roots of this stuff being psychological, and this medication and sterilization route being completely disgraceful and damaging to these children, right? The detransitioner story is really all you need to know. And that the odds are is that trying to mutilate yourself in this way is not going to serve you long term in terms of making you feel better. It might make you feel better in the short term. Many people do have very, very quick transition regret, mind you. They have very, very quick transition regret. Others, it may not become apparent until much, much later on. We do have other physiological concerns as well. People having osteoporosis in their 20s and stuff like that. I got a great conversation with somebody lined up from a Public Child Protection Wales, another one of the representatives later on, to go over more things. I'm grateful to be working with them on a couple of things in the new year as well. Going to be really, really good. Really, really good. But Health Secretary Wes Reading, although he initially permanently banned the prescribing of puberty blockers to people under 18, no surprise that he's gone back on it, especially when I believe he was caught at one of, it was like a left-wing conference. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I believe he was calling like people who are gender critical, like, cranks and all of these other insults, right? And he was caught on undercover video. You should not be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, particularly on things like this, particularly on issues regarding your children, that the government's going to explore every single way possible to get around every bit of legislation to get at them. And if they are unsuccessful, or if public pressure is enough to dissuade one attempt, they will maybe, hold hands up, okay, we're going to do this, we'll retreat. The minute they feel as though that sentiment has died down enough to where they can come back and try and push it again, they will. They will keep testing, probing the wall for weaknesses. And that's why every single time we see these things popping up, they need to be smited back down to where they are, smited back down. No mercy towards this ideology. And that's the ultimate care you can have towards people who are actually struggling with gender dysphoria and stuff like that, is to not play into their delusions. Do everything possible to help them become comfortable and loving in the body that they were given. Not hate it. That would be true care and true love. You cannot do that if you play into the delusions. That's what the government is doing. Think about it. Sterilized individuals for the next generation. How good is that going to be? How good is that going to be for them pushing this depopulation agenda and more replacement agenda that they want to overthrow the democratic system and overthrow the rights and freedoms of the British people in their own home and institute a system of totalitarianism? How good is that going to be for them? It's going to be tremendous for them. Now, you should go and listen to one of the other episodes we've done. I'll try and link the clip down below where we talked about some of the data which was on this topic, right? Showing that not only do the vast majority of children with gender non-contentedness naturally grow out of it as they get older, we're talking like 98, 99%, right? There's a very little in terms of percentage that actually rises as they get older, right? In terms of they want to be the opposite sex. But the biggest thing is that not only do the vast majority of kids, if you just leave them alone, they naturally grow out of it. If you put them in institutionalized care, which is what happened when you looked at the Trails clinical control cohort in the study, right, in that podcast which we talked about, the clinical cohort remained consistently higher in their notions of wanting to be the opposite sex, both males and females, far across as they get older. The state system is completely complicit in a child's notions of wanting to be the opposite sex and deliberately confusing them. If you get them out of the state systems, you'll probably have a lot better results, right? If you get them out of these state systems, you'll have a lot better results. Why the state is trying to punish people like James, who gender-critical and truth-driven therapists, to push this line. Because they cannot have people pushing these alternative true viewpoints as a threat to the political orthodoxy, as a threat to the totalitarian rule. The truth is a threat to the totalitarian rule. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about this because this is where we're seeing a change between what happened in America recently and what happened in the UK. So now the UK is green-lighting a study which is going to be politically motivated, and it's going to be used as a kangaroo study to try to support a political narrative, like we've seen with Cheddar Man and the historical revisionism we talked about earlier on in this episode. It's going to be the same, just from the opposite, just from the standpoint of castrating already confused children. It is absolutely abhorrent. The US House just passed legislation to criminalize transgender surgeries, hormones, and treatments for minors. It passed 216 to 211. This is where you see the divide between right and left, the real divide between right and left, and the real moral divide. We're talking permanently with children's physiology at a time when it is the most sensitive time in their lives, or at least one of the most sensitive times in their lives, right? It has to pass the Senate before heading to the president's desk. This is how they voted, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just crop this a little bit more so that you can see it a little bit better. So, in the passage, you had, again, 216 to 211. You had your Republican delegates, you had your Republicans voting in favor of criminalization, 213, with 4 against it. I would strongly advise Americans to really consider who these 4 are and really consider who they are as they're coming up to like midterms and their actual allegiances and stuff like that. You're talking about these mutilation practices on children that these people did not want to criminalize. They had 3 no votes, scrutinized them as well. As predicted, though, ladies and gentlemen, you had very few Democrats that rocked the boat in this regard. They were overwhelmingly in favor of castration and mutilation of children, with only 3 no votes and 3 in favor of criminalization. Should be completely unanimous. Don't mutilate and don't castrate young children, especially vulnerable, confused young children. But nah, the right, or at least Republicans in this instance, indicative of conservatives and so on, like, okay, let's let kids grow up. Let's let them get to a certain age and then, maybe they can decide whatever they want to do depending on how socially conservative and stuff they are. Okay, that's another debate to be had, what the freedoms of adults are. But Democrats overwhelmingly, no, let's not criminalize it, and let's actually criminalize parents who go against it. Let's criminalize parents who refuse to castrate and assault, which is literally assault, it is literally assault, and harm their children in this way with these irreversible medicalization and sterilization practices. The divide couldn't be clearer. And again, you see here now the left in Britain, Labour, Wes Streeting, trying everything possible to get your children. Parents, you need to protect them. The number one thing you need to protect your children from at the moment is the state. That's the number one thing you need to protect them from, because the state is enabling everything else that you need to be concerned about. The state enabled the Bondi shooting. The state enabled the gangs. The state is enabling the demographic and ethnographic takeover of British communities, a detriment to the British people. The state is the reason why many people in this country are now growing up as foreigners in their own home. In their own homelands. And the state is the reason why, I believe it's 1 in 4 schools at the moment, white children are growing up as the minority in those schools. And guess what? It doesn't end well for them in the vast majority of cases. Because humans are tribal. And then you put in religious influences, familial influences. Don't take the Christians and the Jews as friends. The last day will only come when the slave of Allah hunts the Jews and kills the Jews, so much so that the rocks and the trees will call out saying, "O Muslim, O slave of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." And first they come for the Saturday people, then they come for the Sunday people. Part is true. It's not just religiously motivated, however. A lot of grievances are racially motivated. That's what the whole diversity thing is on about. institutionalized racism. That's why there needs to be exactly equal proportions of every single person in society. Need to have all different pigs of different, slightly different colors and creeds of pig at the table. And funnily enough, all of the animals will massively suffer. It's funny how that works. This is Beth Bourne, for example. This is how far it's gotten in America. I'm not sure if it's this bad in the UK, but a lot of the themes, I can tell you, ring through education in the UK. Make no mistake, your children are the target. Yesterday, and this is from a good while ago, this is from December 10th, Beth Bourne, who is one of the premier people talking about gender ideology in California schools, right? She's a mother herself. Questioned the Yolo County Board of Supervisors, and it says it's a YA book. I'm assuming that's a young adult book, but I don't actually know what YA stands for. I'll just see if I can quickly find out. It's called Let's Talk About It. Now, this might be where you might need to, as I said, you might need to go over to Rumble to find out all about this. Shared the images of naked men with huge breasts, scrotum and penis, and hairy women with double mastectomy scars. And she was also reading from the sections encouraging kids to try butt plugs and online porn. It's literally going online to find out about their kinks, right? No mention of who might be on the online sites that might be wanting to prey on children, right? Because the very author of this book, just gonna, there we go. Just see if I can find that out. The very author of this book, if they're intending for this to be put towards children, it does stand for young adult book. There we are. It does stand for young adult book. Is trying to target young people who are very impressionable and stuff like that. They're groomers in and of themselves, as you will see with some of the content that is actually contained within this book, which I'll actually bring up on screen for you now. Sharing a child's interest in... Hey, what do we call those people, ladies and gentlemen? What do we call those people that would be sharing interest in child's... Well, they say minor in this instance, given it could be, young adults, right? Which in theory, what would be... I don't know, would it be teenagers, or would we be saying then, people who've just turned 18 and stuff like that? She's implying that kids are able to get this through the public libraries and stuff like that in this, in this question, in meeting. So this is obviously disgusting. It's obviously disgusting. And even if I can attest personally with things like RSE education at all levels of the academic curriculum from my conversation with Kimberly Isherwood in the UK, make no mistake, this is being drilled into your children's heads in the UK, stuff like this, even if it's not the exact same book. The concepts are, and the information regarding these things are. And tell me, do you want some random stranger public school teacher talking to your children about this, talking to your children about anal sex, and talking to your children about all of these other many things which people would say that they were disgusting and degenerate? Privately, if not publicly? Right? Is this what you want your kids' heads being filled with? If not, well done. You're on the same side as me and you're a far-right extremist now. Welcome to the club. So... it's why parents, you need to be taking a lot of care with what's going into your children's brains and what's going into the public school system, and should absolutely be asking questions and scrutinizing it, because it is predatory. It is a predatory institution towards your children and their minds. They're very, very vulnerable minds. There's been no more important time to be a helicopter parent than right now. That's just the sad reality. I wish it were different. But the latchkey age is gone. The latchkey age is gone, and anywhere that a kid has access to an internet connection, this was going to say the Ryan Montgomery quote from Ryan Montgomery has been instrumental in catching predators online. He's one of the most well-known, influential, ethical hackers out there. He was one of the people that massively amplified that Roblox is preying on children. Just became aware that Roblox was hosting maps and stuff like that on its, it's a children's game, hosting maps on there which were actively getting them to participate in the assassination of Charlie Kirk Kirk from the perspective of the shooter and glorifying it. For Robux, you can buy t-shirt cosmetics which have the blood coming down here and the freedom across it, right? You can get that. You can actually participate in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, where community members have made this. Not only that, they refuse to take action against predators on their own site or on their own game. And somebody who was actually exposing these predators, they actually went after him for engaging in quote-unquote vigilante justice, right? Now, I know people whose kids play these games. You need to be taking this extremely seriously, and I get it. Your kid's not going to like it. Your kid's not going to like, you know, the overbearing restraints. I didn't like it. Right? I think we need to understand it a little bit differently now, that even if our parents were a little bit helicopter on us when we were younger, they had good reason to be, especially how much has developed since then. That now you have authors of young adult books literally telling children to go online, research their kinks and stuff like that, with God knows who the hell is out there that would want to prey on that. Right? And obviously, don't tell your parents. Let the school system have secrets between you and the school system that your parents don't know about. They might not react in a quote-unquote right way. They might not want you to sterilize yourself. They might not use your preferred pronoun or whatever. And it starts with that, ladies and gentlemen. The slippery slope is often called a fallacy, but we have seen so many things that could be classified as a slippery slope over the last few decades with regards to this social liberalization and all of this stuff, right? From, you know, the 1960s, when you started having this free love culture with the hippies and all of this other stuff. And then again, you had the first pride parades, and then it was forcing to say that gays could get married in the traditional sense, which obviously marriage is not something which even humans could give the power to, that power within the context of a homosexual relationship, because marriage wasn't defined by humans, right? It's a sacrament. Segmented humans can't necessarily change that. That's why you call it a civil union and whatever else. And all of these things stemming from exactly that cardinal sin of pride. But then it was forcing Christian bakeries, for example, to make cakes for homosexual weddings. And then it was, let us access your children. Let us normalize this stuff through the school system. And then let us take away your children by force from the state if you don't go along with their now preferred pronouns, with our indoctrination. A very slippery slope indeed. In this instance, now it starts from using things like preferred pronouns and allowing any kind of pandering to these delusions. If you do, it might make you uncomfortable to start with, but if you do, you're going to be harming the vulnerable minds in the long run. So please don't. Easy for me to say, I don't have children, but this is something I'm vastly concerned about for when I do bring children into the world in the future. I know many of you who are parents, who understand what I'm saying, already do this and already have these concerns. Now, if you've had battles with the school system over these things and whatever, leave them down in the comments below. I'm sure there's many people out there that if they do see this, they're going to be wondering, what can I do? It might be that comment with something that you've done or whatever that gives them that little bit of insight on how they can fight back with this. Maintain their child's innocence. So a lot of these places where legislation and things are coming from, the World Health Organization and the globalist institutions that have the ear of the academics and the quote-unquote experts that have the ear of the government, they don't believe in childhood innocence. They don't believe in childhood innocence. They believe in sexual from birth. They believe it's just a sexuality valid like all the others. Right? They don't care if anybody preys on your kids. In fact, they think it's a good thing. They cheer it on in the name of inclusivity. So it's on you, as it always has been, to protect your children. And the number one thing that you have to protect them from is the state. In particular, the very, very predatory state education system. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the state education system and its predatory nature even more, this has been breaking now. Again, talking about misogyny and, sexism in schools, the predatory nature of the ever feminized school system is meant to imprison and entrap and indoctrinating boys to being girls from the minute they sign up. Often they're forced to sign up. Teachers will be giving training to spot and tackle misogyny in the classroom, while high-risk pupils could be sent on behavioural courses as part of the government's long-awaited strategy to halve violence against women and girls in the next decade. What's the photo that they use in this BBC article, ladies and gentlemen? What's the photo that they use to make you think of who the perpetrators are going to be? Here's the photo, ladies and gentlemen, chosen very deliberately. Centre, which one is front and centre here? Young white male. They will scapegoat the young white males however they can at every single opportunity. When people say that the whole world, in this instance in Britain, is geared against the young boys that are coming through, the young native boys that are going to be coming through, they're completely right. The whole system is designed to make them set up that their natural impulses and stuff like that make them evil oppressors. Evil oppressors. Teachers will have specialist training around issues such as consent and the dangers of sharing intimate images. Plans for schools in England, which focus on preventing the radicalisation of young men, have been unveiled as part of a wider strategy which have been delayed 3 times. Yes, God forbid young men get radicalised against a system that has been set up against them and designed to make them fail, designed to subjugate their people, and, designed to destroy their civilization. They're going so far with this, ladies and gentlemen. They're going so far with this because of Andrew Tate, who's not a good guy by any means, but when you see how the society is set up, when you see the things that have happened, right, and the responses of governments and, the increased feminization of society and the increased demonization of young men, can you fault them? Can you fault them for looking to somebody like an Andrew Tate and seeing maybe an out? Seeing a role model, somebody that understands, somebody that can prey on their own insecurities in a similar way, right? You've created and made them so vulnerable that Andrew Tate is perfect to come in and take advantage of that, right? The system was set up in a way that it wasn't demonizing these young boys for simply just being young boys, right? If it wasn't this disgusting, neo-Marxist, feminist-infused, intersexual communist system, where every single thing in society is the fault of the white man, and as a result you need to target the white boys so that they don't turn out to be the oppressors of the future, but they'll always be inherent oppressors because they'll be white men. They'll always be the enemies of the revolution. Can you really fault them for saying you guys are all against me and everything is all against me? This guy seems to understand at least somewhat. I'm going to go with him. And then they'll look over some of the heinous things that he's done. They'll look over a lot of the heinous things that he's done and try and follow him for... It's more of an indictment of the system. If you had a good system, Andrew Tate wouldn't exist. Or at least the big support that he has with a lot of people wouldn't exist. Wouldn't be this massive personality figure. They're going to bring in counter-terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. They're bringing in counter-terrorism to target radicalization and Andrew Tate. I'm not joking.
40% of teenagers in relationships are victims of abuse. 40% of young men and boys have a positive view of Andrew Tate. 40%. I mean, that is just an extraordinary statistic. In terms of the relentless pursuit of perpetrators, as they are calling it, they're doing various things on that, like they want to drive cultural change, yes, but they're also embedding domestic abuse specialists into emergency responses, and they want to use tactics typically reserved for counter-terrorism as well as serious and organised crimes.
Just linger on that for a second. That is an extraordinary sort of measure of where we are, isn't it? If a young person, a young boy, is radicalised into deep misogyny, thinking it's okay to harm the girls he's at school with, or worse still, the girls he's at school with, or just to, trash talk them either to their face or with other people. That is a form of extremism, and there's no way around that. It's extremism. It's not poor behaviour. It's not boys being boys. It's extreme.
This is the exact indictment of the problem. There's the exact indictment of the problem. See, they went for the worst examples, but seeing here that we need an indictment of it is that we need counter-terrorism and treating this as extremely organized crime. It says if a young boy is radicalized into deep misogyny, thinking it's okay to harm girls, worse still. Vast majority of young boys are going to think that it's not okay to do that. Even if we take, for example, that 40% stat is accurate, and that is actually what this is a reflection of, i.e. that 40% that look up to Andrew Tate, that 40% that look up to Andrew Tate would actually think that murdering whatever is okay. I think that's a stretch, first off. I think that's a massive stretch, right? Obviously, Andrew Tate, not a good role model, but doesn't mean that everybody that follows him is going to be exactly like him. People who look up to Andrew Tate might only take a certain few things from him. Maybe just how he carries himself, the confidence and stuff like that. Maybe telling a few people to shut the f up. Right? Take that as accurate. That still means the vast majority of boys don't. That still means the vast majority of boys don't. Now, I'd like to see how you'd split that down, like, ethnically and religiously, is the other factors which they're glossing over here. They're pretending that men are a monolith, when they're not. Obviously, young boys are a monolith, which they're not. Saying that is a form of extremism, or just to trash talk them, that's a form of extremism. So now, if you tell a girl for whatever to get on your nerves to shut the f up, that's now a form of extremism, is it? These women here are the exact cause of the problem, operating on the system that women, it seems, can do no wrong. Which is exactly where the Greens want to put their policy. The Greens recently said that they would make misogyny, and I believe they would make it a criminal offence, to even say anything that a woman is doing is wrong. This is the ultimate endpoint of feminism, which is the deification of women. And funnily enough, it comes at a point where our society is the worst it has ever been. Funny how that works. Maybe the whole point was the destruction of the society that we had and destruction of any functioning society anyway, because function and order is a sign of the patriarchy. Right? They actually want to make it a criminal offence to say anything that women do is wrong. So any man that would try to defend himself against a false allegation, wrong, instantly wrong, and you're criminalised. Not imagine you're guilty. Again, these go hand in hand with things like the presumption of innocence going out the window, the presumption, the getting rid of the jury trials. All of it comes from the feminization of society. It's not a good thing. Not a good thing. And then who are the people that are going to have to die to uphold this feminized society when they drag us into this war with Russia because they think he's the big bad guy of the current society, right? Because again, no bigger ardent follower, swallower of slogans than young women. Obviously, this woman here, not so young, indicative of the boomer generation whose political philosophy is rapidly dying out. Made no mistake, you could not create a better recipe for young male radicalization than what is coming now, than this very system. It's very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Where were the counter-terrorism units going through Rotherham? Where were the counter-terrorism units going through Oldham? Where were the counter-terrorism units going through Telford? Where were the counter-terrorism units in Cardiff, in Swansea, in Newport? Where are the counter-terrorism units anywhere where racially and religiously motivated gangs were, still are? Where was counter-terrorism for Bailey McLaren and his family? But no. The minute young boys are getting radicalized, make no mistake, if they were radical adherents of the political orthodoxy, there'd be no question that, it'd be perfectly fine. They'd still be seen as, oppressors or temporary allies, possibly, right? But they'd be discarded as soon as they'd outlived their usefulness anyway. The minute they then tried to have anything resembling an output of natural male instinct, that would be seen as patriarchal and oppressive. But instinct is just that, it's instinct. It will win out eventually. Like I said, that if you wanted to do anything possible, or everything possible, if you want to do everything possible to drive people into the arms of the Nationalist Socialist network in Australia, with the response of the political authorities in Australia recently. You could not have done a better job. If you want to drive young men into the arms of Andrew Tate and other people like that, who in this case maybe they see an older brother figure, somebody who actually understands and says, again, many people would say that he's actually not a man, and rightfully so. Again, wolf in sheep's clothing. And do everything possible to drive young men into the arms of another wolf in sheep's clothing because they see it as the only out. You've done the perfect system. Say that if they even so much as quote-unquote trash talk women, that you need to get counter-terrorism involved. What does that tell young men? Maybe they know that something is wrong. They know that a woman is doing something wrong. If they say anything or do anything about it, then they get labeled a terrorist. There was something else I was going to say, but I've just lost my train of thought for the moment. This is why, to your parents, you need to teach your young boys that are coming through to be good men. To be good boys, good men, good virtuous people. That means having an understanding of a good objective moral code yourself. You won't see anything to do with this in the anti-misogyny training, which is how you know it's completely anti-British and weaponized against British young boys in particular. You saw it in the photo that was used to imply who the big perpetrators were going to be. You won't see anything like this off the back of what happened in with the two migrant males that committed that heinous crime against a young girl in I've forgotten the name of the place. You know, the designer refugees that came over and kidnapped and gang the young girl, and are in prison living in a young offenders institute and living the high life with taxpayer funded allowances and all the rest of it. This is an article titled "The Shocking Map of Britain that Reveals the True Scale of Sex Crimes by Illegal Migrants." I wonder, ladies and gentlemen, if we just zoom out on this map a moment. There we go. I wonder if in their training, in their anti-misogyny training, which bear in mind, boys can be the victims of these as well, I wonder if they'll show this map. For example, when some of these foreign nationals, it's been speculated or it's been highlighted that they could be up to 20 times more likely to commit a sex crime against young girls. I wonder if we'll be hearing about this, or if we'll just be hearing about the patriarchy. All to do with the patriarchy. So yeah, it was. I'm just seeing if I can find the place where a young girl, a 15-year-old girl. But yeah, we're talking about Jan Jahanzeb and Isra Niyazal. Leamington Spa it was. I dare say this won't make it into the anti-misogyny lessons. The anti-misogyny lessons. I could be wrong. But somehow I think the fault is going to be squarely at the feet of, the white boy. The white man. Yet again. As it has been in the eyes of many of these hyper-vengeful, vindictive feminists for all eternity. Occult Feminism is a great book to read in this regard, though, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already got it, because it shows how the conflict that feminists and feminism believes it is involved in is a spiritual one at its heart, and has been going on since time immemorial. It's a religion in and of itself. It's part of the satanic worldview. So I strongly recommend you go and make sure you're fully understood with regards to the roots of feminism and where it actually comes from, and why then it is so destructive. It'll be very easy to understand why these systems often manifest in the way that they do, and people follow these ideas with a religious zeal, because it is a religion at its heart when you get down to the heart of it. And that'll do for today. Hope you found it useful, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching, listening. Greatly appreciate it, as always. I know it was a longer one, but I know I've been AWOL a little bit recently. So thank you very much for tuning in, as always, and thank you for bearing with me with the lack of uploads recently. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, night, ladies and gentlemen. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr. I'll see you next time. And you take very good care of yourselves now. And make sure you're getting ready to have a very, very happy Christmas and a happy New Year. We'll hopefully be about, across that Christmas period as well. But we'll probably be finishing up the uploads, at least for a couple of days, probably around, Christmas Eve, probably somewhere around there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You have a good one, and I'll see you soon. Godspeed.